In this video, I'm going to talk about 7 things that people say about cruising that are absolutely and totally wrong. I'm Gary Bembridge of Tips for Travelers. In this video, I hope to blow apart 7 myths about cruising. First of all, cruising is for old white people. Well, it's really not true. The average age of cruising is coming down dramatically. The average age of cruising, according to CLEAR, the Cruise Line Association, is around about mid-40s. However, bear in mind, if you want to cruise in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, those are the 2 biggest cruise regions, you can do it with people who are just like you. So for example, you could cruise with someone like Cunard, which would definitely be older, more mature, and couples. However, you could also go on something like the Royal Caribbean or MSC cruises. These cater for families. They have ships which have lots of resort-like features, and you'll find loads of families, young families with young kids, teenagers on board. Or you could cruise with Carnival. Carnival are fun ships and they attract a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, again, young families. Or of course, if you are very into history, you could travel on something like Voyages to Antiquity. There you'll be surrounded by people who are much more interested in history, much more interested in culture, and there'll be lots of talks, and they will probably be a little bit older. So the age of cruising is coming down very rapidly. It used to be definitely a much older thing, but with the advent of cruise ships like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, MSC cruises catering for families and young people, it is changing. Now, of course, there are some cruise lines that do cater for a slightly older, more conservative audience. So things like Holland America Line and Cunard, Fred Olsen, these are very long, well-established cruise lines, and they have always appealed to an older age group, appealed to slightly more traditional cruising audience. The demographics of cruising are also changing very rapidly. While at the moment about 75% of cruisers are white, and a lot of cruisers are in the United States, there's more and more countries, more and more nationalities, more and more cultures, more and more ethnic groups get into cruising. It is changing really rapidly. So cruising is definitely not just for old white people. You can find a cruise line that matches you, matches your age profile, and matches your interests, and cruise with them. So what is the second thing that people say to me that I also think is wrong? 4,000 strangers on the high seas is my idea of a nightmare. A lot of people talk about how they just hate the idea of being with thousands of people. Well, first of all, there are over 300 cruise ships currently operating around the world, and only a small percentage of those are the big ships. There are, broadly speaking, 4 categories of sizes of cruise ships: small, medium, and large ships, and also increasingly the mega ships. Those are the big ships with the thousands of passengers. Small are up to about 950 passengers, and they include cruise lines like Windstar, Seabourn, Silversea, Regent 7 They tend to be the more ultra-luxury, slightly more expensive end, and that's because the ships are smaller, and so of course the operating costs are higher, so the fares also tend to be a bit higher, a bit more exclusive. In terms of mid-sized ships or medium-sized ships, there are many cruise ships in this category, and this is for passengers between 950 and about 2,000 passengers. You'll find a lot of ships like Cunard Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth. You'll find many of the Holland America ships. Some of the P&O ships like Arcadia fall into this category. A lot of them are built with what's known as the Vista class structure, or the Vista class hull. So there's a lot of cruise ships that operate in this size. In terms of large ships, these are between 2,000 and 3,000. And again, you'll find a lot of the big popular cruise lines do have ships here. So some of the Norwegian ships, some of the Royal Caribbean ships. And then you have the mega ships. So these are ships of over 3,000 passengers. You'll find really huge ships in here. So some of the MSC Cruises ships are in here, some of the Royal Caribbean ships are in here, and things like the Norwegian Epic. So if you're looking for a small ship, you'll find it. So you will not have to be crammed on board with thousands of passengers if you don't want to. The third thing I hear a lot is, I don't want to go on a cruise because I'm worried that I'm going to feel trapped and I'll want to escape and I can't because I'm at sea. But in reality, you're not going to be trapped, because on most cruises, it's very port intensive. So if you take a look at a 7-day cruise, you're likely to be in ports every single day. So probably from 8 o'clock in the morning to about 6 o'clock at night, you will set sail, and then between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning is when you're sailing. Now bear in mind what happens then. You're going to be eating, you're going to be drinking, you might be gambling, you might be watching one of the big production shows, you might be dancing, and then of course you're going to spend 6 or 7 or 8 hours sleeping. So actually you're not going to have time to feel trapped because you're going to be too busy. So the time on board when you actually can't get off the ship is pretty small, and you're going to be very, very busy. Also, the chance of you being bored is very low, because I don't think I've ever met anybody who's come off a cruise ship and said there wasn't enough to do. In fact, most people come off a cruise ship saying, I didn't have time to do everything that was there. Pretty much every single cruise line will have a daily program where activities will start first thing in the morning and will go to way after most people's bedtimes. It's very difficult to get bored on a cruise ship because there is so much to do. Now, the fourth thing that I hear a lot from people is, I don't spend time in my cabin, so it's not important. I disagree, because I really believe that the cabin you stay in is incredibly important. It is going to be the one place that you spend more time in than anywhere else on the cruise. So even if you're a big party animal and you're only spending 6 hours a night sleeping, or if you're spending up to 8 or 9 or more hours, add in time to get dressed, to get changed, to get ready, whether it's to go out on excursions or for your night out, you're going to be spending between 8 to 10 hours a day in your cabin. So it's very important that you choose the right cabin. So you might decide you don't want to spend a lot of money on a cabin, so you want to go for an inside cabin, but do choose your cabin very carefully. The secret to finding a great cabin, whether it's an inside cabin or whether it's a suite, is the following. Take a look at the deck plans or ask your agent and make sure that you're surrounded on every side by another cabin. So you have cabins above you, you have cabins below you, you have cabins on either side of you, and ideally cabins opposite you. Make sure that you're surrounded by cabins. So in those few hours or many hours that you're sleeping or relaxing in your cabin, you'll have a nice, quiet and restful place to retreat to. So I do believe cabin is very important. It is the place that you spend more time. The fifth thing that I hear a lot is, I won't go on a cruise because I'm worried about getting seasick. Now, someone left a great comment recently from their dad, who'd been in the Navy for 30 years, who said the only way to not get seasick is to stand under a tree. Either don't go to sea. So there's always a chance that you get seasick. However, modern ships are designed to ensure that you have, and their passengers have, an incredibly happy and great cruise. And the way they do that is the ships are designed to deal with the ocean. So one of the big innovations is modern ships have stabilizers. So if the sea does move around a lot, they can deploy stabilizers which go to either side of the ship and stop it from rolling. The secret, though, is if you are concerned about getting seasick, make sure that you book a cabin in the middle of the ship and as low down as possible. That is where the least movement will happen. And by booking the right cabin, taking the over-the-counter medicines like Dramamine or Sturgeon or similar will ensure that you do not get seasick. Bear in mind, the cruise lines want people to keep coming back and back and back. So they're going to make sure that they do whatever they can to make sure that you have the smoothest ride possible. The sixth thing that concerns people the most is about dressing up. I often get messages saying, I want to go on a cruise, but I really don't want to go because I hate the idea of dressing up. Generally speaking, if you like wearing relatively casual clothes and you don't want to get dressed up, most cruise lines will have a smart casual approach. But make sure that you avoid the more traditional cruise lines where they do really encourage you and expect you to dress up, so like your Cunards, your Fred Olsen. Cunard, for example, still has a lot of formal nights and they are very strict. Nowadays, most cruise lines have a relatively relaxed dress code. So most cruise lines will allow you to wear much more casual clothes on board. However, pretty much every cruise line will not allow you to wear jeans or shorts into the dining room at night, although not all of them apply that strictly. If you want to wear shorts to dinner, the best cruise lines to take a look at are Norwegian and Disney. Norwegian Cruise Line has probably the most relaxed and open approach to dress codes. The next thing I hear a lot is the concern over norovirus and getting ill. So I recently had a comment that cruise ships are floating germ-ridden traps. Now the big concern here is norovirus. It gets a lot of publicity. And norovirus is the vomiting and diarrhea stomach bug. It's not very pleasant. Now norovirus, it does happen on ships, but it happens much more on land. The issue with ships is it has to be reported, it's documented, and gets a lot of publicity because it's very clear that it's happened in a confined space. Whereas when it tends to happen, whether it's in hospitals, care homes, or other places where people concentrate, it doesn't often get as much publicity. And the critical thing, if you don't want to get norovirus, is just follow the guidelines, follow the rules. And the key thing is keep washing your hands with soap and water for up to 20 seconds. The little trick a captain once told me is you basically sing happy birthday to yourself. Use the alcohol gel that's around the place. Avoid touching your mouth. Avoid touching lots of public spaces that are touched a lot, like handrails. But basically, if you follow the protocols, you have a very strong chance that you will not get norovirus. But don't let a fear of norovirus stop you going on a cruise. It happens on cruises, it doesn't happen as much as people think, and it's much more common to happen on land. That's 7 myths that I constantly hear about cruising that are stopping people going cruising, or things they believe about cruises, and they really are not true in my view. So I hope you found that helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you gave a like or a thumbs up. But very importantly, please subscribe to Tips for Travelers and you'll get much more travel inspiration, advice and tips.